Hello, and welcome to our final episode of The Scramble. I'm your host, Luis Rodriguez. Thank you for being with us. On today's show, we'll discuss the presidency and the qualities needed to be one of the greats. Before we begin, let me introduce our panel. Joining us is Stephen Parker, Professor of Political Science and the Internship Coordinator for the department. Next, we have James Schaeffer, a junior majoring in Journalism and Media Studies. And finally, we have Matt Kimball, UNLV graduate of Political Science. Thank you for being with us. All right, so let's begin with our first question. On the show, we have spoken many times of this presidential cycle, but one thing that we haven't mentioned is what makes a great president and how the greats have become one of the greats. Professor Parker has studied the presidency and teaches a class here on campus and teaches what traits are needed to become a great president. Before I go with Professor Parker, I want to hear from our student panel what they think. So James, what qualities make a great president?
I think you have to be a master negotiator and be able to speak it at all in very plain English. I mean, if you're voted in by the American people, you have to be able to speak to the American people and have them be able to understand what you're saying. And I know that you might say that, oh, you know, you want a president who is very well versed in the politics, very well versed in the understanding, the format, the layout of what it is to be a president. The president also has to be able to get down on one knee and explain to the American people, like many presidents have, and tell them how things work behind the scenes.
Could you provide some examples of those presidents?
Well, you might have that from scandals from Reagan to Nixon, being able to get down on one knee and explain a troubled situation, to both Bushes explaining states of war. I mean, those are two instances where events drew them to come and speak to the American people. But speaking in plain English and be able to take the time for those fireside chats, as Roosevelt made popular, really, I think, sets home what a president is, being able to speak plainly to the American people.
What about you, Matt?
I believe leadership is a massive skill the presidents need, is the ability to not only delegate tasks out rather than doing all the work themselves, to being able to engage with others within both parties to create substantive policy. We look at Lyndon Johnson, who used his experience as Speaker of the House to really work with Congress and to get bills passed. So from him, we get our Great Society. From other examples, we have candidates who, like Abe Lincoln, who have had members of both political party in his cabinet. And we've really seen that in some of our recent presidents as well.
All right, so we have our Out of the Office segment, and this week we approached students on campus to ask them what they thought makes a great president. So let's go watch and see what they said.
Qualities that make a good president is basically truthfulness, understanding, commitment. I would say heart as a most, because, you know, as a human being, heart is what everybody has. Everybody needs somebody with a strong heart, a will and a force, and something that's going to be dedicated to making something better for us, as not as more as the United States, but as the world.
Well, if they have leadership skills and also if they're open-minded.
Qualities that make a great president would be strong leadership skills and a great background, and holds the highest morals and values to themselves.
Basically, someone who remembers what it's like to be an actual average citizen of the United States of America, not the top percent, because it's very easy to get distance. It's not that they're bad, it's just they don't remember what it's like.
So what do you teach in your classes and the qualities that make one of the greats?
Well, let's get away from the classes part. Let's just talk about the subject itself. And I think that your two colleagues have hit upon two very important dimensions to the presidency. Theodore Roosevelt called the first part, that is dealing with the people, the rhetorical presidency. That one of the ways in which a president can create change is by going directly to the citizenry and kind of rousing them to action. And he's on everybody's, all the scholars' list of the greats for a number of reasons. One of which is the attempt to really institutionalize this approach. He had multiple occasions where there would be a logjam in Congress and a bill that he wanted really couldn't get passed, and so he would do what other presidents have done since, but he was the innovator. He would take a show on the road, and he would go by train and speak for in multiple states. I mean, you couldn't do the sort of huge spans of space and territory that we can do today with the airplane. But that's a major part of it, and some presidents are really good at that. They're great orators. Others, I mean, not so much. I mean, Reagan was a great orator, but you would expect that because he spent most of his career in the film industry and knew how to present whatever he had to present. Somebody like Jimmy Carter, who was a nuclear engineer, he wasn't very good dealing with either constituency. I mean, the other constituency that has been mentioned, of course, is Congress. And occasionally governors and others, other officials in the government. Carter really believed that there was a correct solution to everything. You could, in his era, we would. I've been talking about figuring it out with a slide rule.
Right.
I mean, today it would be, you write the right software and you can come up with the right answer. And that just didn't work because he was not a constituency-oriented person. He was a very effective manager, but usually successful presidents, one of the things that makes them successful is that they can hire the successful managers. They can hire the managers who put into practice and into place the goals that they're most interested in.
Okay, so now that we have the basis of what qualities a president should have, let's go to our current president with President Obama. So with only a couple months left in his presidency, will historians list him as one of the greats? What do you think, Professor?
I think that the answer is probably yes, partially for symbolic reasons. We have this huge change in social class and ethnicity, and I mean just breaking that barrier, as it will be part of it. But I think it's a secondary part. Dealing with the subject of racial politics in general. I mean, he made that a national priority and a national issue. One of the things that leaders do is change the conversation. Mm-hmm. And he basically did that. And maybe saying change the conversation is a little bit of a stretch, because while he did get the Congress talking about that and the American people talking about that, the way in which he generated change with regard to civil rights and civil liberties in general, and people who had been, millions of people who had been kind of frozen out of the process, was through unilateral executive action. He's for most of his presidency, he's been dealing with a situation where it's impossible for him to get anything that he wants through Congress, which is partially his fault because he takes no prisoners.
Well, let me go on with our other panelists. So, Matt, what do you think? Will he be listed as one of the greats?
Almost certainly. Is just in how he ran his campaign, as we started seeing new concepts in how a campaign is run. We see the buzzwords of hope and change. We see the iconic Shepherd Ferry print, and we associate that with how he ran his presidency. And then now we have the 2016 campaign where hashtags are all the buzz.
So you're saying that he'll be known more for his campaigning than his tenure in office?
Not necessarily. I mean, that's just the first step, is that when we look at his record in foreign policy, he's made some great strides. He's encountered some obstacles, but he also engaged with two countries that previous U.S. presidents had refused to.
So, James, I'm going to come to you.
Okay.
So when he ran for president back in 2008,
Mm-hmm.
many said that he wasn't qualified because he was too young and inexperienced. And today, even those same people still say that he's been a failed president because of his inexperience. So do you think he was inexperienced?
My argument would be qualifications change from presidency to presidency. And for the 2008 election, it definitely was, as Parker said, more of a symbolic election. I mean, heck, if you look at the Obama administration, look at the last State of the Union. And if you can just here, that State of the Union paired alongside the reel of things that happened in the 2000s, the first black president. I mean, that presidency accomplished many things. I mean, the things you can point out to is health care reform, $787 billion stimulus for the recession, pulling out of Iraq, pulling out of Afghanistan. I mean, if you want to look at how effective this president was, it's just the same as how popular he was. And I think it'll speak to great truth when you look at it in history. From a historical perspective, Obama is definitely a pillar of change for not only his campaigning, which was great and magnificent if you want to look at real sort of mastery and illustration of painting someone that isn't qualified for the job in the sense of what other qualifications might have been in previous elections. You have Al Gore, Bush, you have these kind of like, I guess you could say, sort of tribes or families that usually your Kennedys, your Nixons, your Reagans, your Bushes, your Clintons.
Your dynasties.
Your dynasties, exactly. And for Obama, it was a great way of poking in the eye of saying, this is change, this is what it looks like, and get used to it.
Okay. So we've talked about how President Obama has changed the way we view campaigning. How much of a change has it been from past presidents, Professor Parker?
With the act of campaigning, as opposed to the act of actually governing once in office.
Right.
I think that he's been. I think that whoever was in that position and whoever's running campaigns now, they've had to adapt or die, and I don't think, I mean, I'm not an expert on campaigns and campaign techniques. I mean, a lot of it comes down really to the idea of different constituencies. There's convincing the people, but there's also convincing the donors, and most of that hasn't changed all that much. I think Obama's been well advised with the types of electronic strategies that he's used, but whoever was in that position would almost by definition, by natural selection, would be open to those kinds of ideas, or they already would have been thrown by the wayside. He's much more interesting, I think, in terms of how he governs than how he ran his campaign, because again, frequently even campaigns that are cutting edge change and all of this, those ideas are coming from hired guns that the leaders have brought in, and his management style is one that's been around for a while. It's something that we call the administrative presidency, where the person who lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue does not really rely primarily on Congress, but relies on the use of executive orders and the setting of budget priorities, and the types of appointments that he makes to his cabinet, and then all of the sub-level management positions. I mean, he's been, probably because he basically had no choice. I mean, he's been very, very aggressive in doing it that way since he's been so systematically blocked in Congress.
So, would you say that's a good thing or a bad thing, his use of executive orders and talking to the Congress?
I'm not sure I want to cast it in terms of good or bad. It's a pragmatic thing. In terms of myself as a student of power and of administrative power, it's a good thing, I think, because what he has done is greatly expand any president's ability to take the initiative and use these techniques. I mean, a lot of that did really start with the crisis of 9/11 and George Bush Jr. Having to do lots of things administratively, not so much because he was blocked, but because he needed to move really, really fast. And even when things are going well with Congress, it can take forever to get them to act.
To bounce off that, when you look at executive orders, I agree in part and dissent in part, because when you want to look at executive orders, you want to look at the person that who has the highest and lowest amount of executive orders in order to try to measure. And again, you're dealing in superlatives. You're saying what is the greatest and what is the worst. If you want to deal in superlatives, then, and I would say that look at FDR, 3,522 executive orders for his entire administration. That's nearly a executive order per day.
But you're talking now of a different presidency because his administration was 16 years compared to the normal 8.
Okay, so if you want to look at Obama's administration and we look at the entirety of the executive orders, if we have for FDR 1 per day, the actual statistic for Obama comes out to 0.09 per day executive orders.
You've looked that up. I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
And so when you're looking at that number, you want to look at what an effective presidency and what a popular presidency is. And I think that's what we're separating here. And that's a dichotomy that's very hard to put together. A popular presidency or popular campaign, I guess you could say, look at Harry Truman versus Dewey. You have a very haphazard, very sloppy campaign by Truman, but he ends up beating Dewey. The presidency you would call perhaps a not lackluster, but not notable either. But then you look at, say, Bush versus Dukakis. The whole reason why Bush won, not the whole reason, but is because Dukakis ran a sloppy campaign, and Bush did the exact same. But there you have an effective presidency because you have a president that led us into the Gulf War, a president that was that was before the election, of course, but a president that came off the heels of a Gulf War with striking popularity in numbers. With Obama, when you want to look at his campaign, it was popular and, I would argue, as effective as well.
All right, so with that, we're going to have to take a break, so stick around and we'll be right back.
You always made sure I brushed my teeth.
You told me that smart was cool.
You always told me to dream big.
To all of those parents who took the time to make raising their children their most important job, we'd like to say,
thank you.
Thank you.
From the bottom of my heart, thanks, Mom and Dad.
This message is brought to you by the U.S. Air Force.
Who's the best qualified and why? So, James, who's the best qualified?
If you want to look at the rubric of management skills, negotiation, and orangeness, then I would say probably Trump. And as unfortunate as that is, I would argue that that wouldn't be as important. You want to look at who's able to go across party lines, who has the effective experience in order to govern correctly, be able to have a good showmanship, and be able to effectively represent the American people on a foreign and domestic scale. And that person, I would argue, would be Hillary Clinton.
Okay, why is that?
I would look at her experience as in the legislative experience, as a Secretary of State, and also being First Lady. If you want to look at who has the best showmanship, I would argue Hillary Clinton. If you want to look at who has the best experience in governing, in the legislative and executive, I would say Hillary. And if you want to say who's best dressed, I would say Hillary there as well.
With their pantsuits?
Yes, with their pantsuits.
All right, what about you, Matt? Who's the best qualified?
I totally agree with with James. I believe Hillary Clinton is an outstanding candidate for our presidency.
What's wrong with Kasich or Cruz or even Bernie?
The argument is who? Those candidates don't have the delegate count they need, and if we're going to look at what actual viability they have, that is an argument that is null.
Well, you never know, because again, if we're looking at the Republican side, you still have a contested convention.
Sure.
And Ted Cruz could always come up and be Trump.
You're right, and if we look at that, and we look at
so you can't really say that who, because I mean, if you look at Bernie, you can't say who. Kasich, maybe you can say who.
Well, I would argue that if you're able to look at an opinionated media or news programs, but I would tell you that the reason why I'm saying my argument would be because of math and numbers. If you want to look at it as the biggest delegate count, that would be Trump. If you want to look at the actual propriety of not propriety, but the actual happening of a contestant convention, it's not looking that good. And it's not looking that good for Kasich, Bernie.
No, as of Tuesday, we know it's not going to be a contested
Exactly.
convention. I mean, he's got enough votes to do it.
Right.
So what about you, Professor Parker? What do you think? Who's best qualified?
It's a giant consensus here. I mean, I definitely think that Hillary, with all of her experience, I mean, I look back on the one big mistake that she has committed in public life was advising Obama and advising him strongly to take out Muammar Gaddafi and end that dictatorship in Libya. Dictatorships are not necessarily bad things. I mean, it all started with W invading the wrong country, and so we destroyed that dictatorship. And the result of the destruction of those two dictatorships within a single decade has been the mass chaos that we have now, and this horrible toll of death and struggle that's going on with the tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of migrants.
Well, wouldn't you say that another mistake that she had was with her email scandals? With
yeah, well, that's sort of a personal style mistake. I mean, it was kind of a rookie error that you wouldn't expect from a rookie. I'm thinking of it in terms of general public policy and the depth of understanding and purpose that generally goes with that amount of experience. I have no way of explaining the email thing, and there are sometimes there's this saying that you hand your enemies a knife, and that's what she did, because that may well become an issue again between now and November.
Right. So, James, why is it that most Americans are voting or are supporting non-politicians? So, your Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. So what do they have that the other politician candidates don't?
I would say most Americans aren't supporting politicians is because most Americans aren't politicians. Most Americans can't relate to a political field, can't relate to the amount of responsibilities and the amount of mudslinging and the amount of, as we were just talking about the email scandal, one simple mistake can lead to a horrific year-long battle about will she, won't she, what is this all about, legislative battle, and when you want to look at why are Americans supporting non-politicians for the presidency, the reason simply is because I would argue they aren't as informed. If you want to look at a candidate that speaks in literal sound bites, that's Trump. If you want to look at a candidate that speaks the most highly of his administration, that's Trump. If you want to look at a candidate that's taken down more opponents, that's Trump. But on the opposite end of that scale, if you want to look at a candidate that has the most experience, has the most viable plans, and has been in the office that she will hopefully take, that's Clinton. The reason why most Americans aren't supporting or were supporting Trump more than, say, a more political candidate is surely because they don't understand, and I would argue this on air, that they're not as informed. The American voting public isn't as informed as they need to be, and that is on them, not the candidates.
All right. So Matt, same question, and the other day Ted Cruz made an announcement of his VP candidate. Will that even help him at all, or no?
I honestly can't tell you the answer, whether announcing Carly Fiorina as his VP choice will aid his campaign or will it hurt his campaign. I mean, this is a man who has led a sort of filibuster in the Senate. This is a man who has said...
Well, not sort of, he did.
So it wasn't a filibuster because there was business taken afterwards. It ran until that business was taken, and it didn't go over. This is a man who has said, he's going to aim for that basketball ring. What does that mean?
Yeah. It's a desperation move.
Yeah. As far as why are non-establishment candidates are popular, I believe because, the average American will turn on the news and watch, deadlock in Congress again, hear about how Congress was shut down in several years ago for 16 days. They'll listen to how we aren't getting things done. They'll see Obama exasperated at not getting things done. Then you have two very magnetic personalities come in and say, you know what, this is the change we need. I want to make America great again. Right. And then even though they have yet to articulate a formative plan to do so, hearing these candidates are seizing upon that momentum, that desperation that we need change and we need it in any regard. And that's why they're choosing those two candidates.
All right, so before we go, let's give the final thought to Professor Parker. So quickly, why will Trump not be, why do you think Hillary will beat Trump if we know that those two will be the nominees for each party?
Why do I think that she will beat Trump?
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the biggest reasons why I would predict this is that it's hard for me to imagine nearly half the population that's female casting a vote for this male chauvinist jerk. That's just the demographics of that and what his record is. I mean, I don't think that the problem for him is going to be his issues. I mean, the whole issue of foreign trade that resonates with thousands of people who've seen their jobs evaporate and go overseas, but what doesn't get pointed out is that the more tariff barriers we put up, the more tariff barriers, et cetera, that other countries put up, and this is all going to come home to roost in 5 years.
And I'm sorry, but with that, that's all the time that we have. I just want to thank our panelists for coming by, and I also want to thank Professor Parker for stopping as well. Please follow us on Facebook at UNLV Scramble and on Twitter at UNLV The Scramble. Also, email us your opinions at unlvscramble@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. It's been great hosting this show for you guys, and we'll see you next season.